I'm just glancing at the screen down from me. You can see the tellers there in the House of Commons chamber starting to line up. The body language of both sides is absolutely crucial in these nerve-wracking moments like this, because this isn't just about what happens with Brexit. It's about whether we have a general election. It's about who is in charge of this country. Let's have a listen in to what's happening in the House of Commons right now.
Order.
The ayes to the right, 328. The noes to the left, 301.
Not a good start, Boris.
Order. The ayes to the right, 328. The noes to the left, 301. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock.
Not a good start indeed. What you just watched was the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, in his second showing at that dispatch box, losing control of that same parliament. Boris Johnson has lost control of his government. They had one question. Should MPs take control of parliament business? That was the only motion. I'm going to show you the conversation that took place before this vote, meaning from Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn. I'm going to show you all sorts of just elegant, beautiful politics taking place in the UK right now. Elegance is an understatement. It is cutthroat on so many levels that I kind of want to delve into and talk about, because I don't think I've heard people talk about them in these very specific ways, because they're not as cynical as I am. Boris Johnson has lost control of his government, and not just his government, his governing majority. Welcome to the soapbox, and you're going to see the wrong intro, and I apologize for that. Where is my intro? Hello everyone, welcome to Soapbox After Dark. I apologize for the intro biz. When I was at the radio station, we were working with a different intro to try to use for the station. So I hope you guys are doing good today and had a decent day. It has been a long day. Everything from getting car inspected to doing the radio show. The radio show in and of itself is a little stressful because you're trying to get a bunch of shows situated for all at once. However, I'm awake, I'm active, I'm functional. It's 2:20 in the morning when real men can't sleep, real men do the news, and there is amazing news taking place in the UK. Before I start, if you guys dig this content, you find yourself coming back here often, please like, share, subscribe, and of course, you can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. Let's hop across the pond. What you just saw, Boris Johnson losing control of his government. And not just losing control of his government. This also took place today. You're going to love this.
Statement since moving into number 10. With acute timing, one Tory MP chose that moment to cross the floor. Boris Johnson spotted him going to sit with the Liberal Democrats, thereby wiping out the Tories' working majority of one.
I wish my honourable friend all the best.
The Prime Minister.
He said he wishes his friend all the best. A Tory gets up when Boris Johnson goes to give his speech, what he's going to say on this particular thing, because of course he doesn't want this particular vote. And he gets up and walks across the aisle with the Lib Dems. In the middle of his first speech. Humiliating, cutthroat politics. He was trying to make a statement that he does not approve of what Boris Johnson is trying to do and the Brexit that Boris Johnson is trying to take. He walks across the aisle. Boris Johnson loses his governing majority. It goes from +1 to -1. So not only did he lose his governing majority, he also lost control of his government. Oh, this is awesome. Now, this one motion is should MPs take control of Parliament's business? Why? Why do they want to take control of Parliament's business? Because they want to put a seal on Boris Johnson's ability to have a no-deal Brexit, or force him to take an extension. Both of these are poison pills. Understand what that means. Understand what that means. It makes no sense in a negotiation standpoint. They're trying to tell the Prime Minister that they don't want him to have the ability to walk from a negotiation. Say that passes. Say that deal passes. That tomorrow they say there's no circumstance where the Prime Minister can leave without getting a deal. And Brussels says, fine, you're going to get the exact same deal we gave to Theresa May. Take it or leave it. Now, what is the Prime Minister supposed to do in this situation? You've just told him that he can't leave. The European Union has just said the only deal that they're going to give you is the deal that they gave Theresa May, which Jeremy Corbyn has said is unacceptable. And that part, if you don't have the ability to walk in a negotiation, then you're stuck with essentially taking whatever they give you. Which, again, can end up being Theresa May's deal that had been rejected by the House 3 times. That makes no sense. However, it does make sense in one particular context. If your name is Jeremy Corbyn, and you know that Boris Johnson can't accept that he can't accept an extension because Boris Johnson has staked his entire political capital when we are leaving on October 31st, come hell or high water, with or without a deal. Fine. We're taking control of Parliament. And you know what we want? We want an extension. That's what we want. And I'm going to work with the backbenchers in order to go with that extension. So now what? How is Boris Johnson going to accept that? Boris Johnson said, I am not accepting that. There is no situation. There's a breath in my body. I'm not accepting that. And I will be forced to call a general election. Labour has been trying to get a general election for 3 years. For 3 years, they've been trying to get a general election. And at this point, Jeremy Corbyn is like, well, we'll see. Let's see if it passes first, and then we can talk about the general election. Because he can't have a snap election on his own. He needs 2/3 of Parliament to be able to call that snap election. This is fascinating politics. Like I say, taking no deal off the table doesn't make any sense in the context of a negotiation. It makes all the sense in the world if you want to tie up your political opponent, because your political opponent has staked all of his capital on this notion that we're leaving on October the 31st, come hell or high water. They want him to go to Brussels, hat in hand, begging for an extension. And he says, I will not do it. I will not do it. What has been taking place in Britain today is outright pandemonium. They have no idea what is going to take place. The problem here that Boris Johnson runs into is that even though Parliament had no idea what it wanted, that is the exact same Parliament that Theresa May had, with now one less Tory. And not just the exact same Parliament. That Parliament had no idea what it wanted. It was all over the place in regards to Brexit. It was like a bone in its throat that it couldn't necessarily digest. What it does know it doesn't want is a helter-skelter, drunk man off of a cliff Brexit. Which is what Boris Johnson is threatening. Understand, though, Boris Johnson has to threaten that. If you look back at my old videos, I argued months ago that there was going to be a general election. I thought, inexorably, you're going to end up in a situation where there had to be a general election. Parliament couldn't come to a consensus on what Parliament wanted to do. And there was no situation where there was an appetite for this notion of another referendum because you've already had a referendum. You haven't even had the first referendum enacted yet. And so it's, what do? You continue to have Theresa May's deal brought up over and over and over and over again. And the moment that you switch to another prime minister, he has no mandate. Boris Johnson has zero mandate in this process. He's only been put into office by Tories. And because he's only been put into office by Tories, he has not gone through the fires of an election where the public has given its approval to what he wants to do. He is a weak prime minister. Regardless of the bluster, regardless of the puff in his chest, regardless of, the right-winger stuff. It's a picture of weakness. It's a picture of weakness. Boris Johnson has no choice but to push for a potential no-deal Brexit. Understand the logic. From his standpoint, he needs to be able to get a deal. Right now, Brussels is not giving him a deal. And in order for him to get something out of the process, he needs a stick. He needs something to hit them with. It's just so happened that the thing that he can hit them with is essentially bashing himself in the face over and over and over again, with this notion that Europe doesn't want Britain falling out of in its kind of uncontrolled Brexit. It will injure Britain, but it will also injure Europe with certain unforeseen consequences. Boris Johnson knows this. The European Union knows this. And it's just so happened that Boris Johnson is willing to stab himself in the arm if it just so happens to nick Europe right behind them. It's his only card. It's the card that he's going to play. I will walk if you don't give me a deal. Now, if Europe believed that he had the capacity to do that, he would have clout to maybe get a deal. That's true. He's right. He's not lying when he says that part. However, that freaks out the public because it is also true that that level of brinksmanship can end you up out in this kind of Mad Max drunk man off of a cliff Brexit, which is what the public is freaked out about. Both things are true. Boris Johnson needs that capacity. If Britain was behind him, if all of Parliament was behind him on his notion that, yes, we would take a no-deal Brexit, we're prepared, etc., if they don't give us a deal, then that's a different circumstance. Europe knows that you're serious. Europe knows that you have a parliament behind you that is going to be able to enforce a particular deal. That's different. But that's not what we have. We have a divided parliament in which may disallow him the ability to be able to use the only stick that he has, the only arrow he has in his quiver. This is fascinating politics. Jeremy Corbyn knew exactly what he was doing by pushing this particular petition of taking control of Parliament and stopping him in his process. Also, Boris Johnson jumped the shark because the moment that you did the prorogation, Parliament was going to respond. Parliament looked at it as a usurping of their authority of sorts. Now, no laws were broken in that process. It is perfectly true that he has every ability in the world, legal authority to do that. However, Parliament also is going to feel some kind of way about it because Parliament understood exactly what was taking place. He was trying to put them in a corner where they would be forced into accepting something they may not want to accept. Parliament responded. They responded by taking the power away from the Prime Minister. Oh, God, I love this politics. I love British politics. Let's take a look at the response before the vote. Yeah. Let's listen to what was taking place before the vote. Because I'm going to show you before the vote and I'm going to show you after the vote. Meaning, this is after the Tory leaves, meaning he's just lost his majority. And this is him trying to make his pitch of saying, look, don't leave me on this. At this point he had threatened deselection, all sorts of stuff. But it didn't work. But up to that point, before the vote took place, this was the pitch that he gave, his argument that he made to Parliament. When he's going back and forth with Corbyn. I'll show you his and I'll show you Corbyn's. And then I'm going to show you his response, his fiery, furious response after the vote. British politics is fantastic.
Mr. Speaker, it is simply wrong. It is simply wrong to say we are not making progress. There is a lot to do in the coming days, but things are moving. And a major reason for that is that everyone can see that this government is utterly determined to leave.
By the way, the reports, the reason they're laughing at him is because reports that came out saying there was no progress, that all notions of Boris Johnson getting some kind of deal or making some kind of movement was a sham. And again, you can understand why it's a sham, because ultimately for all the the bluster, he still has the same parliament as Theresa May, the same parliament that has no propensity for a no-deal Brexit. Regardless of him threatening no-deal Brexit, Europe knows that that parliament is not going to give him that. Now, there's a secondary part to this that I kind of want to point out. It's possible that Boris Johnson wants an election. It's very possible he may want an election. In order for him to get what he wants in regards to affecting his will, he needs a different parliament. The catch here is that's risky because there's no way to know if you're going to win that particular contest. You can end up with another deadlock parliament, or you can end up with Jeremy Corbyn as prime minister. It's a crapshoot. However, what is absolutely true is that nothing is going to get through this parliament. That's also true. And he is not going to accept an extension. That is also true. Which means you're most likely looking at a general election. But let's hear him out.
The EU on October the 31st, come what may, without a deal if necessary. And that is why over the summer my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, has been leading the government's efforts 7 days a week to accelerate our national preparations for this possibility. And he will be making a statement on that subject shortly. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has made all the necessary funds available. We have already reached agreements with our partners to roll over trade deals worth around 89 billion of exports and imports. We have secured air services agreements around the world. We have increased the capacity of our border force, strengthened the resilience of our ports, bolstered our freight capacity, and worked with meticulous detail to ensure the uninterrupted supply of critical goods, including medicines. We will be ready, Mr. Speaker. We will be ready. Mr. Speaker, I returned from the G7 with real momentum in the Brexit discussions. I want to return from next month's European Council in a similar way, with a deal that this House can debate and scrutinise and endorse in time for our departure on October the 31st. But, Mr. Speaker, there is one step that would jeopardise all the progress that we have made in the G7 and around the capitals of Europe. And that is if this House were to decide that it was simply impossible for us to leave without a deal, and to make that step illegal, to force us, that's what they want, to undermine our...
By the way, he's right. Boris Johnson is a flagrant liar. Don't misunderstand me. This is the guy that came out and says, yeah, the lab told me that the Russians did it. And the lab was like, we have no idea what this guy's talking about. So there's that. But what he's saying here is true. They want to collapse the government, which is the reason why they're putting this poison pill in this amendment that we need you to get an extension beyond October 31st. Boris Johnson, I will never give an extension. We're going to leave on October the 31st, come hell or high water. Well, these are two irreconcilable things. Boris Johnson is right when he's pointing to Labour saying they want this. They're doing this intentionally. That is true. But both things are true at once. They don't want you stepping over a line where you take them out of the European Union. You have no mandate. You weren't put into office by the entirety of Britain. You haven't been tested in the fires of an election. You have been put in by a bunch of Tories and Brexiteers. They are not wrong for trying to constrain your powers in this case. They're not wrong at all. By the same token, it's utterly ludicrous that you will be in a negotiation where you have no capacity to walk. The politics in this is fascinating because you have several things that are true at the exact same time. Boris Johnson needs that capacity to have any level of real negotiation with the European Union. By the same token, they do not want to give him that capacity, especially with it being such short notice and in the way that he was trying to strong-arm Parliament. Both things are true. They're irreconcilable. Meaning, again, you're probably going to most likely end up in an election. Boris Johnson pointing to Labour saying they're doing this on purpose is absolutely right. By the same token, you have no mandate. They have no reason to allow you to go through this particular course of action, in which case they are absolutely entirely correct in trying to constrain your particular powers, especially if they believe they will do a better job of Brexit. If this is the thing that will collapse the government, then why wouldn't Labour do exactly this? Especially if they believe that what you're trying to do is going to injure Britain. I hope you understand what I'm saying. I'm not saying, it sounds like I'm saying two things at once, but I guess I am. But both things are true. They don't necessarily eat each other. Both sides have a particular perspective and what they need in order to operate. Labour needs to stop Johnson. And in the way that they're going to stop him, they're trying to stop him by forcing a general election. That forcing the general election is you need to extend Article 50. If they get that vote, you will get a general election. If they don't get that vote, then something else is going to take place. All of this is uncharted waters. This is not necessarily something that's happened before. This is really bizarre politics. And yet you have, politics nonetheless. It's fascinating. Let's let him finish. But Bojo is right here. That's my point.
To force us, that's what they want, to force us to beg, for yet another pointless delay. If that happens, all the progress that we have been making will have been for nothing. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, a deal was published. A bill that the Leader of the Opposition has spent all summer working on. And this is not a bill in any normal sense of the word. It is without precedent in our history. It is a bill that, if passed, would force me to go to Brussels and beg an extension. It would force me to accept the terms offered. It would destroy any chance of negotiation for a new deal. It would destroy it. And indeed, it would enable our friends in Brussels to dictate the terms of the negotiation. That's what it does. There is only one way, Mr. Speaker, to describe this deal. It is Jeremy Corbyn's surrender bill. That's what it is. It means running up the white flag. The bill's shameful. It means running up the white flag. And I want to make clear to everybody in this House, there are no circumstances in which I will ever accept anything like it. I will never surrender the control of our negotiations in the way the Leader of the Opposition is demanding. Mr. Speaker,
Order. People mustn't keep ranting from a sedentary position. However long it takes, the statement will be heard and the response to it will be heard. That is the reality, and nothing can gainsay it. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we promised the people we would get Brexit done. We promised to respect the result of the referendum, and we must do so now. Enough is enough. The country wants this done, and they want the referendum respected. We are negotiating a deal. And though I am confident of getting a deal, we will leave by October the 31st in all circumstances. There will be no further pointless delay. This House has never before voted to force the Prime Minister to surrender such a crucial decision to the discretion of our friends and neighbours overseas. Because what this bill would mean is that unless we agree to the terms of our friends and partners, they would be able to keep us in the EU for as long as they want and on their terms. And I urge, therefore, this House to reject this bill tonight so that we can get the right deal for our country, deliver Brexit and take the whole country forward. And I commend this statement, Mr. Speaker, to the House. Thank you.
Technically, this is not a bill, this is a motion. Also, look, Boris Johnson has a point. And his point is, if you get what you want, you are essentially forcing me to beg Europe either for an extension or to accept whatever terms they give me, and that is an untenable position to put a prime minister in. Does he not have a point? Whether you like Boris Johnson or not, be honest. Does he not have a point? He does have a point. Now, that said, so what? This is not about fairness. This is not about, points. This is about smash mouth politics in sorts where one side is trying to take power. Jeremy Corbyn has plotted, prayed, gone after, done everything in his power to force a general election, and he is now on the cusp of doing so. If he wins this vote, he will be able to force a general election. And not just that, it goes a little bit further than that. If they go so far as to say the prime minister cannot do Brexit without having a deal, the government collapses. The government collapses. It is an untenable position for a prime minister to be in. Because again, a deal that was rejected by Parliament 3 times could literally be given back to Boris Johnson and say, this is the only deal we're going to give you. And by law, they wouldn't have any choice. It's like they would have laws that would conflict with one another. Essentially, you have a law saying the prime minister has to get a deal. And the deal that he gets is the exact same deal that was rejected by Parliament. But Parliament says that he has to get a deal, even though Parliament has rejected this deal. This gets weird in regards to the politics. But again, it only makes sense in the context of stopping Boris Johnson and tying him in knots in order to force a general election. I hope you understand that. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Let's keep going. And you can say, okay, well, the statesman-like argument. Yeah, I'm a little cynical. I don't buy the statesman argument. I buy it in some cases. Don't misunderstand me. But from the standpoint of what Jeremy Corbyn is trying to do, he is trying to take power.
Order. For the avoidance of doubt, there is no vote on a bill tonight. There is a vote on a motion. And if that motion is successful, there would be a bill tomorrow. Order. I say this simply because the intelligibility of our proceedings to those observing them is important, and I'm sure everybody on all sides of the House would recognise that fundamental truth. The Leader of the Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for an advanced copy of his.
And again, I don't mean to butt in, even though I know I'm butting in, but remember the context of this. Boris Johnson has just lost his majority. A Tory just walked across and joined the Lib Dems. Bojo is losing control of the government that he has just essentially started as Prime Minister of. Corbyn, at this point, is going to have wind in his sails. Because at this point, again, Johnson has just been humiliated. Just wanted to give context.
Statement. And I join with him in recognising the great human suffering of World War II, the great human bravery that took place during that war, in that awful conflict which began 80 years ago, but was essential in defeating the disgusting ideology of the Nazis and fascism at that time. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister met EU leaders over the summer and the EU Council President Tusk at the G7. After these meetings, the Prime Minister struck an optimistic note, saying the chances of a deal were, in his words, improving. His optimism was not shared by those who have been at the same meetings. The Prime Minister may claim progress is being made, but EU leaders report that the government has so far failed to present any new proposals. Can the Prime Minister clear this up? Can he tell us if the UK has put forward any new proposal in relation to the backstop? If so, will he publish them so that these proposals can be scrutinised by Parliament and by the public? It's becoming increasingly clear that this reckless government only has one plan: to crash out of the EU without a deal. The reality is exposed today in the in-house journal of the Conservative Party, otherwise known as the Daily Telegraph, which reports the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff calling negotiations a sham. Reports that the strategy is to, quote, run down the clock, and that the proposal to alter the backstop is a complete fantasy. And those are.
If you want to know why Boris Johnson lost that vote, meaning lost control of his parliament, is because everything that he got up there and said was a lie. Essentially, when the people came, the reality of it is, there's no, these negotiations are a sham. This isn't going anywhere. So regardless of the face that he's putting on it, the reality of it is these guys are running down the clock. Again, there's no propensity in Parliament for a no-deal Brexit. He lost control for a reason.
The words of the Attorney General. No deal, Mr. Speaker, will mean food shortages, reduced medical supplies and chaos at our ports. Not me saying that. The government's own leaked analysis says, and it warns of chaos all across the board. Today, we had expected a publication of the government's no-deal preparations. This government is hiding from scrutiny, hiding from the people, and trying to hide us from their true intentions. This isn't just a government in chaos, but a government of cowardice. Thankfully, some in Whitehall are putting these vital documents into the public domain. But we shouldn't have to rely on sporadic leaks. So will the Prime Minister set out today when these documents will be published so that the people and Parliament can scrutinise and debate them? Many on the benches opposite would relish a no deal. They see it as an opportunity to open up Britain to a one-sided trade deal which puts us at the mercy of Donald Trump and the United States corporations. That will increase the wealth of a few at the expense of the many. When it comes to the crunch, Mr. Speaker, too many on the government benches who once opposed a no-deal outcome are now putting their own careers before the good of the people of this country. Just look at all those Tory leadership candidates who said it would be wrong to suspend Parliament in order to make no deal a reality, or more likely, but sit passively as their principles of just a few short weeks ago are cast aside. I don't know what they were doing over their summer holidays, but something changed. And it gets worse. Not only have they all stood by while the Prime Minister launches his latest attack on democracy, some have repeatedly refused to rule out the possibility that the government could ignore any law passed by Parliament which was attempting to stop a no-deal Brexit. So will the Prime Minister, when he responds in a moment, take the opportunity to assure the country that his government will abide by any legislation passed this week by this Parliament? The attack on our democracy in order to force through a disastrous no-deal Brexit is unprecedented, anti-democratic and unconstitutional. Labour will do all we can to protect our industry, protect our democracy, protect our people against this dangerous and reckless government. I condemn the rhetoric the Prime Minister used when he talked about a surrender bill. I hope he will reflect on his use of language. I really do hope he will reflect on his use of language. We're not surrendering because we're at war with Europe. They are surely our partners. If anything, it is a no-deal exit that would mean surrendering our industry, our jobs, surrendering our standards of protections in a trade deal with Donald Trump and the United States. Mr. Speaker, the UK should be using its position in the G7 to promote policies to tackle the climate emergency. The climate emergency is real, but instead of standing up to President Trump to to save his blushes this time, it was in fact agreed there would be no joint communiqué on this at the G7. This is not leadership, this is fiddling while the Amazon burns. The situation across the Amazon should be a wake-up call to this Prime Minister, who once described global warming as primitive fear without foundation. As we watch fires rage, not only across the Amazon, but Angola and the Democratic Republic of Congo, does he stand by those sentiments? While funds to protect and restore the Amazon rainforest are welcomed, the Prime Minister knows this is merely a drop in the ocean. So will more money be pledged for the Amazon, and are additional funds being made available to tackle fires in sub-Saharan Africa? And will he be introducing measures to stop UK companies from aiding, abetting and profiting from the destruction of the Amazon rainforest and indeed the rainforests in West Africa? The UK Parliament on May the 1st became the first state parliament anywhere in the world to declare a climate emergency, and I was proud to move that motion. We must continue to show global leadership on this issue. On Iran, Mr. Speaker, it's notable that the Prime Minister fails to condemn President Trump's decision to unilaterally tear up the internationally agreed Iran nuclear deal, creating this crisis which now risks a slide into even deeper conflict. Does the Prime Minister plan to work with European partners to restore the Iran nuclear deal and de-escalate tensions in the Gulf? We are clear that in government Labour would work tirelessly through the UN for a negotiated reinstatement of the nuclear deal and to defuse the threat of war in the Gulf. Effective diplomacy, not threats and bluster, must prevail. And will the Prime Minister call on the Iranian authorities to end the unjust detention of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe? And what actions has he taken so far to ensure her release from the terrible situation that she has been plunged into? Mr. Speaker, we're all concerned about the situation in Hong Kong. No government anywhere should get to shut down rights and freedoms or to pick and choose which laws it adheres to. Will he urge the Chinese government to stick to the Joint Declaration of 1984 and stand up for the rights of citizens in Hong Kong? Mr. Speaker, later today, this House has a last chance to stop this government from riding roughshod over constitutional and democratic rights in this country, so that a cabal in Downing Street can crash us out without a deal, without any democratic mandate and against the majority of public opinion. He isn't winning friends in Europe, he's losing friends at home. His is a government with no mandate, no morals, and as of today, no majority.
That last one had to sting. That last one had to sting. Too soon, Jeremy, too soon. So I want to show you what took place immediately after he loses. He loses his majority. Again, second time at that dispatch box. He loses his majority in this kind of humiliating show where the guy just leaves outright in front of him. And then he loses the vote that allows him to control Parliament, meaning essentially he loses control of Parliament. Let's take a look at his reaction to this. And I think Corbyn, in fact, Boris Johnson's and Jeremy Corbyn's immediately after the debate, immediately after this is told.
Another Burko fix.
Boris Johnson has just lost.
A milestone.
A big milestone, Hugh.
One of the front benches want to speak to the Prime Minister.
Let me know, no doubt, Mr. Speaker, about the consequences of this vote tonight. It means that Parliament is on the brink of wrecking any deal that we might be able to strike in Brussels, because tomorrow's bill would hand control of the negotiations to the EU, and that would mean more dither, more delay and more confusion. And it would mean that the EU themselves would be able to decide how long to keep this country in the EU. And since I refuse to go along with that plan, we are going to have to make a choice, Mr. Speaker. I don't want an election. The public don't want an election. I don't believe the right honourable gentleman wants an election. But if the House votes for this bill tomorrow, the public will have to choose who goes to Brussels on October the 17th to sort this out and take this country forward. Everybody knows that if the right honourable gentleman is the Prime Minister, he will go to Brussels and beg for an extension. He will accept, you will accept whatever Brussels demands, and we will have years more arguments over Brexit. And by contrast, Mr. Speaker, everyone knows that if this government is in charge and if I go to Brussels, I will go for a deal, and I believe I will get a deal. And we will leave anyway. Even if we don't, we will leave anyway on October the 31st. The people of this country will have to choose, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition has been begging for an election for 2 years. He has crowds of supporters outside calling for an election. I don't want an election, but if MPs vote tomorrow to stop negotiations and to compel another pointless delay to Brexit, potentially for years, then that would be the only way to resolve this. And I can confirm that we are tonight tabling a motion under the Fixed Term Parliament Act.
The Fixed Term Parliament Act is the act that allows they would need 2/3 of support, meaning they would need Labour support in order to make that work, in order to call that election. His point is, if you take control of Parliament, which you have already done, and if you pass an extension, I will not go through with that, meaning I will have on October the 14th a general election. And he's pointing at Labour, essentially saying, are you going to be on board with having this general election? Whatever Jeremy Corbyn says, Jeremy Corbyn has been trying to have a general election for the last 3 years. The thing is, and I've said this before, Theresa May will most likely be a bad campaigner. Theresa May is a bad politician. Whatever you want to think of Boris Johnson, he has charisma. I watched this, and I can't help but like the guy. Don't like his policies, don't like what he would do from the standpoint of Brexit, none of that stuff. But he has a certain charisma about him that comes off of him when he is doing what he's doing. I thought that of all of them, he would be the most dangerous campaigner, and that the polls showing that Labour in the lead won't necessarily be the same under this kind of fight with Johnson as ahead of the party and head of the ticket. I don't know if Johnson actually secretly wants an election in order to be able to enforce his will, with this notion that he thinks he may be able to beat Corbyn in an election, needing Labour to join in with this notion of an election, in which case he's kind of saying, I don't really want an election. I don't want an election, when in the back of his mind, he absolutely wants an election. Especially with some of the polling that I saw, they kind of made the point that people want to leave the European Union more than they want to kind of have a secondary referendum, and that Jeremy Corbyn is in risky territory in the fence sitting, as opposed to Boris Johnson, who has a clear position in what he wants. So it's possible that Johnson wants an election, in which case all of this is just theater, with the hopes of getting Labour to join in and pushing for an election. That said, doesn't matter. That doesn't matter one iota. That's what Johnson wants. That's his perspective of the political spectrum, potentially. Labour's perspective is, we need to be in power. Period. And everything that Corbyn has done up to this point will be utterly meaningless if his goal is not to have a general election, which means he needs to get one of those bills through, either to constrain the hands of the Prime Minister, ideally to not stop a no-deal Brexit, meaning the last thing he wants is to lock himself into not being able to leave without a deal. That's a nuclear option. That's not necessarily something he wants. However, if you can get a situation where the Prime Minister gets a 3-month extension, then Boris Johnson is going to automatically trigger an election. Everything is meaningless if he doesn't go through with this. Meaning everything that Jeremy Corbyn has done up to this point has led to this very specific moment where he's finally getting the opportunity to potentially get a snap election. Oh, it's awesome politics.
Thank you. Point of order, Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, I welcome tonight's vote. We live in a parliamentary democracy. We do not have a presidency, but a prime minister. Prime ministers govern with the consent of the House of Commons, representing the people in whom the sovereignty rests. There is no consent. There is no consent in this House to leave the European Union without a deal. There is no majority for no deal in the country. As I've said before, if the Prime Minister has the confidence in his Brexit policy, when he has one he can put forward, he should put it before the people in a public vote. And so, he wants to table a motion for a general election. Fine, get the bill through first in order to prevent, in order to take no deal off the table.
That's a squeamish response. Because you understand what I mean. Jeremy Corbyn, in order for Boris Johnson to table, essentially, in order for Boris Johnson to push for a snap election, he needs Labour's support. Jeremy Corbyn's response in that was squirrely. He was like, table the amendment to take no deal Brexit off the table. It's like, what? What does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? I don't know what that means. Does that mean you're going to support that motion for an election? Don't you have to? I mean, again, everything that you've done up to this point has led to you collapsing this government by getting this particular vote with a parliament, with a prime minister that either A, jumped the shark by making parliament, let's say, overly jumpy, meaning the moment that you try to usurp power from parliament gets pissed off at the fact that you're trying to usurp power from parliament and pushes back. The moment that it looks like you're not actually trying to get a deal, you're trying to push for a no deal, there's no propensity for a no deal Brexit. In which case, parliament says, we don't like this. And you get enough backbenchers working with Labour to say, no deal. No, we're not going through with this. Essentially telling the Prime Minister no. This is fascinating politics, and I got to be honest, nobody knows what's going to take place tomorrow. This vote is going to be held tomorrow. No one knows what is going to take place. No one even knew what was going to take place from the standpoint of this vote. All of the stuff at this point is in the weeds. It is possible that Boris Johnson wants an election. I mean, maybe. Because at the moment that Boris Johnson suspends Parliament, he has to know that Parliament is going to respond in a particular way, that they're going to be pissed off at the fact that he's suspending Parliament. He also has to know that he has a paper-thin majority, and for the most part has the same Parliament that Theresa May had. Meaning that if he doesn't know this, meaning if he didn't know that this was going to happen, or that Parliament could have potentially pushed back at his attempts at kind of running roughshod over Parliament, then he should have known. Clearly, they weren't going to stand by and just let him do that. That's what I'm saying. It's possible that he wants a general election. He's pushing him in this way to try to get Corbyn to bite. But I don't know. And I still say that regardless of what Boris Johnson is thinking from a political calculation, Labour needs to take power, which means Corbyn needs to get his election. Otherwise, that election doesn't take place till 2022, I believe. So, British politics is absolutely, entirely fascinating, man. Cool Blue 71. We need the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom to be Jeremy Corbyn. We need the President of the United States to be Bernie Sanders. You know, I had a conversation with a guy who told me that Jeremy Corbyn would never be leader of the opposition. Here we are. He said not only never be leader of the opposition, he would never be prime minister. And That guy also thought Hillary Clinton was going to win by 300 and something votes. These people have no idea what the hell they're talking about. They look at the world through a particular lens. If they have that election, it is possible that Corbyn win. Whatever you want to think of Corbyn, this is cutthroat politics. Corbyn has literally tried to collapse the government, going back with Theresa May. We're not going to negotiate. We're not going to negotiate. We're not going to negotiate. Now, to be fair, Theresa May and the Tories had an insular process by which they were kind of going about this. And only at the last minute tried to, okay, maybe we need help trying to pass this bill. That bill was grotesque. That thing was voted down like 3 times. I guess my point is this. You can't try to pull labor in at the last minute and then try to claim that it's a dual bill. It's not. For the most part, Corbyn and his team said, we have these preconditions that need to be met. Now, the preconditions were automatically set to fail because the goal of it was to ensure that they got no support from labor. That worked. That was enough to get Theresa May to essentially fail. And not just from labor, from even her own party, in a sense, collapsed her deal. Her government collapsed. The next guy comes in. That guy gets elected by 90,000 Tories in a country of 66 million people. How on earth? How? He has no mandate. He has no even like basic electoral integrity from the standpoint of getting elected. He was only elected by Tories. By definition, almost, if you're going to get anything accomplished, especially if you want the political clout that you're talking about needing, you got to have an election. I don't know how you get through otherwise. Jeremy Hunt said it himself when he was running. He says, this guy's going to end up in a general election. I said, yeah, he is. He is. So, all right. I'll end this here. I got to be honest. I'm just tired. I'm dragging ass. Like, share, subscribe. Pay attention to British politics, man. It's gotten really interesting. And I'll leave it here. Thanks all. Oh, and I think I explained it before. Everybody is working in their own interests. Boris Johnson is doing this because he has to, because that's the only way he's going to get a deal. But it's very possible that Boris Johnson's not even trying to get a deal. By the same token, any ability for him to get the deal is entirely dependent upon his ability to be able to threaten the European Union with walking. If they close that door, he is completely neutered. And he would have no ability to do what he told the public he was going to do. By the same token, Corbyn and Labour may be penalized for people thinking that these guys are trying to inhibit and stop Brexit, meaning countermanding the referendum, essentially ending any notion of a democratic system whereby people hold a referendum, make a choice in a referendum, and that referendum is carried out. If that's what takes place, yeah, Corbyn is going to be punished for doing so. By the same token, right now, they're trying to tie Boris Johnson in knots. And the first modus operandi, the first goal, is to get in office, which means Boris Johnson needs to fail. He failed once. He needs to fail again tomorrow, at which point you will get your general election. All right, guys. Like, share, subscribe.